Welcome to episode 215 of the Ski Podcast, and thanks for joining us, listener. There's lots coming up in today's episode. We're going to be discussing all the latest ski news from Australia, finding out how sales are going for this winter, plus looking into some possible good news for young people wanting to do a ski season. We'll also be finding out what the snow's like right now on the glaciers in Tignes and Val and getting an update on this autumn's London Snow Show. Now, my name is Iain Martin. I'd like to introduce my guest today. I'm delighted to welcome back to the show for her third appearance, Australia specialist and founder of the Snow's Best website, Rachael Oakes-Ash. Hi, Rachael. How are you?
I'm really excited to be on episode 215. That's a lot of episodes.
It is. I've been working very hard, particularly over the winter. And just to clarify, for the benefit of the listener, where are you today?
I'm in Australia. I'm in the Southern Highlands, which is like the Cotswolds of England. I'm about 4 hours from the ski fields, and I've just come back from Jindabyne in Australia and also from Wanaka and Queenstown in New Zealand.
Well, we'll be coming on to that. You've clearly been very busy. Thank you very much for joining us in what must be your evening. Yeah, 9 o'clock in the morning for us. My other guest joining us for the second time on the podcast, Sales and Marketing Director at Skiworld, is Diane Palumbo. Hi, Diane. How are you?
Very well, albeit slightly tired, not having come back from ski fields, but having come back from a Three Valleys event last night.
Well, we'll mention that in due course. Often what happens is I interview people on the podcast. We see each other by video, and then at some point later we bump into each other and go, "Oh, wasn't it nice to catch up?" Whereas as it goes, I happened to see Diane last night at this event, and we say, "Oh, we'll see you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m." Now, generally, I steer clear of politics in the podcast, but I should probably mention that we are recording today, Thursday, 4th of July. So here in the UK, it is a general election. And it's still early in the morning, but in the spirit of voting, I wondered if I could start off by asking my guests a crucial question. If you had to pick one ski resort to cast a vote for, which one would it be? So I've sprung that one on you. Rachael, what do you think?
Whitewater in Canada.
Oh, right. Okay. Why would you pick that one?
Because it really is a ski field that's all about soul. It's community owned. It has incredible terrain. You can't sleep at the resort. There's no base area to sleep in. It's just a really cool place, and it's got really great food. And I feel like it really epitomizes why we all started skiing.
That's great. Diane, where's your vote going?
I'm not sure I could do one. But the first one that sprang to mind is Jackson Hole, which was a bit of a mecca. I'd always wanted to go. The year I went, the snow was poor by their standards, which meant that the drop into Corbet was doable. And I did it. When the snow level's normal, I would never have had the courage to do it.
Well, I think, Diane, you should change that story and just go, yeah, I love Jackson Hole. I've got the Corbets, one of my favourite places to go. Excellent. Okay, well, quick question then. Another question I always like to ask my guests is, when did you ski or snowboard last? Now, Rachael, it is ski season for you, but when were you last on the snow?
Oh, that's really embarrassing, actually, because it was Japan last year, in February last year. I didn't actually ski the southern season of Australia last year or New Zealand, mainly because it was so bad. And I didn't ski this northern season, and I'm raring to go now.
Okay, well, you definitely need to get back on snow. What about yourself, Diane?
There was an announcement after I left Italy in the middle of March that there was no pasta left. Yeah, I skied in Italy for the very good reason that I wanted to eat my way around the mountains, which I did.
Which resort were you in?
San Cassiano in Alto Adige.
Okay.
Cellaronda. It's kind of just off the Cellaronda. You can get onto the Cellaronda for it.
Very keen. Now, I'm looking at this winter, maybe Coleman or Val Gardena, one of those two possibly.
Yeah, and Val Gardena, you're very close to one of my all-time favourite mountain restaurants, which is Jimmy's Hütte. And Corvara is kind of more authentic. It's less of a tourist town. You really feel like you're in Italy when you're in Corvara. And the food I'm reliving every meal as I speak to you. It's like I'm running a video in my head. So I did have to loosen my ski trousers most lunchtimes. There's a confession.
Well, It's definitely on my list, and certainly, one of the advantages of Italy is the gastronomy and also the prices. So, hopefully I'll be able to report on that a little bit later on. Now, we're just going to turn to a couple of snow reports. Glaciers are open for summer skiing in France and in Austria and in Switzerland. We've got news from two of them. Firstly, we've got Alex from 150 Days of Winter. He went to Tignes.
Hi, Iain. Alex from 150 Days of Winter with a snow report from the opening day of the Tignes Glacier, the 29th of June. Now, before I start, if I was to list off these weather conditions, you would probably come to the different conclusion to what it actually was. Tignes Grand Mont Glacier was scheduled to open last week on the 22nd, but due to torrential rains and flood warnings, was delayed. Not as bad as what happened in Zermatt, but probably precautionary. Then throw in a heavy layer of Saharan sand, so much so that you might as well be skiing on a beach, or at least with a permanent sepia tone, and maybe throw in some high winds for good measure. What more could go wrong? Well, thankfully, May and June have been unseasonably cold, so the existing snow on all the peaks has been excellent. So much so that the opening of the nearby Col de Liseran was delayed for 10 days, while they cleared excessive snow from the Bonneval-sur-Arc side. More than enough to make up for the African dust storm. So, best snow coverage for years. Shame it wasn't slightly whiter. It's just a disappointment the glacier is only open for another 3 weeks.
I'm pleased to say Alex will be back for episode 216 in a couple of weeks' time to bring us all the latest news on Courchevel, where he lives. I also spoke to John Yates Smith from YSE tour operator last week in a broader interview that I'll be releasing later in the year. As he's based in Val d'Isère, I also asked him about the current state of summer skiing there.
The glacier is open now. There's a lot of snow, but it's wickedly warm and the ski conditions are not great, to be honest. Well, there were a surprising number of tourists apparently up there yesterday and having a good time. The trainer I spoke to said the snow was pretty soft, but there were civilians up there having fun. Mostly it is ski clubs from around France, particularly from this area, of course, but also a lot of Italians and foreigners from as far away as Brazil and Argentina and all sorts of places who've come to our glacier to train.
Now, while there is skiing going on in the Alps, Alex referred to that major flooding a couple of weeks ago. You may have seen footage of Zermatt and La Berarde near Les Deux Alpes. I'll include it in the show notes, but it is shocking. Huge volumes of water, shifting significant amounts of rocks and soil. In the case of Zermatt, meant the resort was closed, literally closed for 24 hours before the railway opened again, and then the road. Hiking trails are still closed, or some hiking trails are still closed, I should say, with La Berarde, which is, if you've been to Les Deux Alpes and you've ever been down to Venos, the little village, it's in that Ecrins Valley in the national park down there. And I wrote about this for J2 Ski. Experts are calling that a 10,000-year event. The most significant flooding and rock movement since the last glacial period. And they're currently lobbying for estimated €1 million required to clean up and rebuild. That is the mountains, but, it was a combination of heavy rainfall and an increase in temperatures at altitude that melted a lot of snow that was left over after April, because we had a lot of snow at the end of the season. And that led to extremely large flows of water all at the same time. So I think most people know by now that climate change does represent an existential threat to the ski industry. And we can see here how it can have a negative impact in summer as well. Now, regular listeners will know I'm always promoting sustainability initiatives within the industry. And as we move into the autumn, I'm organising panels and presentations about sustainability at Ski Launch and Listex and the London Snow Show. And that's going to come up very quickly. So this seemed like a good opportunity to find out about that London Snow Show. Earlier this week, I spoke to Lindsey Coleman, the event director for the show. Yeah. Delighted to be joined by Lindsey Coleman, event director of the London Snow Show. Hi, Lindsey. How are you today?
Hi, Iain. I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
I am good. I know we're notionally in the middle of summer, but I went for a swim this morning. I was so cold afterwards, I had to put on my ski jacket. So it made me think about winter. And I mentioned the show itself. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about it. Where and when will the show be this year?
Sure. So the London Snow Show will be returning to Excel in London on the 19th to the 20th of October.
Now, that's where it was last year. That was the first time that you had the show there in Excel. I personally really enjoyed it. I actually found it a bit easier to get to than I was anticipating. I haven't had a lot of experience of going out there, but I know that you're going to be packing it with features and with stars and celebrities. Who's going to be there this year?
Yeah, absolutely. So our main headliners are Bode Miller, Dave Rydin, Amy Fuller, to name a few. There's several others. So Gigi Roof, Charlie Guest, Benji Alexander. And we have got others that we're currently speaking to.
That sounds interesting. A couple of thoughts come to mind straight away. While evidently it'll be fascinating to see them interviewed on the stage at the show, Bode Miller, I spoke to him last year. There's a podcast about him, Dave Rydin as well. Coming on to the features, the other aspects of the show that are going on, what can visitors look forward to this year?
Yeah, we've got loads for visitors, actually, and it's always really important to us to ensure that, we've got a diverse range of exhibitors, but from a feature point of view, we want to ensure that we're given a really good day out. So we've got the Crystal Beginners Slope, obviously sponsored by Crystal Ski Holidays, so we'll be able to offer around 400 taster ski and snowboard lessons across the weekend. We've got our brand new mountain safety feature in partnership with the ski club. We've got Snow Stage, we've got the Greystone Ramps and Tramps, we've got the sustainability feature sponsored by Crystal as well and in partnership with POW. So yeah, there's lots going on.
Oh, that's some very interesting things. We actually met at Listex Luxury and you were telling me about some of this. And that mountain feature from the Ski Club of Great Britain, is there going to be like a feature there where you can test your ability to use or practice your use of transceivers?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are finalising what that looks like at the moment, but there will be aspects. So there'll be educational talks on the stage there. We'll have product and kit demos. We'll have transceiver training of some kind, but also not just focusing on that experience and advanced skier, but we'll have things for like family. If you're new to skiing and snowboarding and you just want to know how to stay safe on the mountains. So it will very much be for everybody, but there'll be some really nice interactive elements to that feature.
Something that's always of interest to me, you mentioned sustainability there. So that's going to be a hub where people can go to find out how to reduce their carbon footprint, how to limit their impact on the mountain in their ski holidays.
Yeah, that's right. So sponsored by Crystal Ski Holidays, who are really working hard in this area to obviously reduce carbon footprint, but in partnership with Protect Our Winters as well. So they already work very closely together and will be delivering a range of content at the show to just educate and inform people how to be a bit more sustainable.
Within all of that, you mentioned something about a rail or something like that. Are you going to have competitions? Is it something anyone can try?
It won't be something everybody can try. It will probably be tailored to your kind of semi-professionals, if you like. But yeah, the JibWorks Rail Jam. So we'll have a rail jam across the weekend. That will be a really nice, interactive, entertaining piece, I should say.
And so just to finish off then, remind us when and where that show is.
So London Snow Show, 19th to the 20th of October at Excel in London.
Oh, that's brilliant, Lindsey. Look forward to joining you there. I think I'll be doing a presentation on the sustainability side of things, and listeners, I'll be including a lot more information about that and a link to get free tickets in the show notes. Thanks, Lindsey.
Thanks, Iain. Take care.
So, Rachael, I was wondering, over here, the number of shows that are on have gone down. There is going to be a northern snow show this year. What's the situation in Australia in the lead up to the season? Do you have, shows around the country?
We have one show, which is, we have more than one, actually. We have the Snow Travel Expo, which happens in May, just in Sydney and just in Melbourne. Great opportunity for all of the resorts from around the world to come down and have some fun. We also have a number of ski wholesalers that also have their own shows, like Mogul Skiworld will have one in Melbourne, and they might partner up with Aspen to do that or partner up with Whistler, and the same happens in Brisbane. But they're more intimate shows. They're not so much of an expo, and that's always in May.
Those expo, the bigger shows, for example, at the London show, Lindsey was telling us about how, for example, they've got like a beginner's slope there and like a rail jam. Do you have features like that at those shows?
Well, it didn't this year, but usually Phil Osborne, who has set up the shows, does do that. There's usually a terrain, like a slope-style urban jam that you can win. There's Huskies, there's some St. Bernards. It's not in the same league as I've been to that London snow show. That is like off the charts. That's like you could spend 3 days there and still not see everybody. Well, I could because I talk a lot. So the guys at the Snow Travel Expo in Australia, it's one big giant hall. We call it Japan Wall. There's an entire wall of Japan, which you just can't get through because everybody's in the Japan section. Canada take over a quarter. This year, South Korea, set up a mammoth, huge, they were cooking things and throwing things and all sorts of stuff. And then all the other resorts from around the world, they're all there too. It's good. It gets everyone pumped, but it is only Sydney and Melbourne.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about the Australian market a little bit later on. If it's okay with you, I'd like to turn to Diane now. I mentioned that we met last night at the Les Trois Vallées event in the UK. It was very interesting. There was actually a presentation during the course of the event by Charlie Owen, who is one of the co-founders of SBiT, Seasonal Businesses in Travel. Diane, I know you're on the board or the committee of that as well. It's a lobbying group. And it was very interesting. He was talking about the work SBiT is doing to try and promote train travel. And I wondered if you would like to elaborate on that, because I think most listeners will probably have no idea of this kind of activity that takes place behind the scenes.
At SBiT, what we're looking at is, number one, the planet's burning. And the ski industry cannot afford to be behind the curve. We've got to be leaders in addressing this. And as tour operators with tens of thousands of people traveling with us, we can make a difference. How do you get people from flights onto trains? We can run our chalets more economically and more environmentally friendly. We cut down on plastic, single use. We're all doing those kind of things and measuring our carbon emissions. But the big one is those flights. And so SBiT started to use the contacts it's developed in relation to youth mobility, which is at government level in France, local and government level, to say, can we have a meeting with the head of SNCF, please, because we need some more trains? Can we meet with Eurostar, please, because we need some more trains? Can we have the 2 MPs for the region on a panel with us? And I think because of the credibility we've earned over the last few years, we got those meetings, only to discover that it's going to take 3 or 4 years to get some of those trains in place.
I understand the principle you're talking about there. Essentially, regular listeners to the podcast will be aware that, let's say, the carbon footprint of your ski holiday, if you're coming from the UK and you fly, around 50, 60, 70% of that, depending how you look at it, is coming from your travel there, the flight. So the principle of what you're looking at with SBiT is to work out how you can facilitate it, make it easier for people to travel by train. And one of the things that Charlie said was he identified, perhaps through your meetings with SNCF, is that Saturday, as far as trains in France are concerned, are like running to capacity. So you're trying to make a shift towards people traveling Sunday to Sunday instead.
Exactly. Our ski program used to have Saturday and Sunday departures, but for probably flying reasons, it's all been consolidated towards Saturdays now, which has also contributed to the huge traffic jams that can happen in the mountains. All you need is a heavy snowfall and customers are on a coach for 5 or 6 hours. And so the authorities are equally keen to move people onto a Sunday. But if we do that with flying, which we've started to do already, it makes it much easier to start selling your train journeys that can go from a Sunday to Sunday, which opens up some more rolling stock to us. Not enough, but it opens up more, and we can start to make an economic case for that.
Another of the issues that Charlie flagged, which essentially is what I've been trying to do with the Ski Flight Free campaign, is that as well as the issues of capacity, people need to be educated in letting them understand that it's not quite as difficult as they might perceive to do that journey by train. And is that something that SBiT is trying to get across as well? Are you looking at ways of, educating the market?
I think it's less educating the market and more putting in place the tech to make the whole thing a lot easier to book. I don't think the tech to put in place a streamlined booking system is the challenge. I think the tech could be there very easily. All our systems, software, middleware, all talks to each other pretty easily now. It's actually making those links easier. And then I think people will start educating themselves.
And so therefore, would Skiworld, enable their booking system to allow people to book train travel as part of that package with one of your chalets, for example?
Absolutely. And we're doing it, and we have a feed with all of that data with up-to-date prices, which is mixed with a feed with transfers, which is a mixture of our own transfers as well as bought-in transfers. And of course, then we hold our own chalet stock, and that's live availability. The tech to bring all those together and produce a price and book online, it's already there.
That's really interesting. And I mentioned you're on the podcast previously. It was actually just over 2 years ago in episode 95. And, as well as the issue to do with climate change and how that's affecting ski resorts, we were also coming off the back of, COVID and the impact of Brexit as well. And I think it might be useful for the listeners to understand, the position you're speaking from. Skiworld, am I right to say it's the largest independent ski company in the UK?
I think so, yeah. I haven't done a market survey, but we're the largest, definitely the largest chalet operator, 68 chalets now. The mainstay of the programme is the high snowshore resorts in France, Austria, if you count St Anton.
How does that compare to, let's say, 10 years ago? I'm presuming you've got fewer chalets than you used to have?
Yeah, we used to have over 120 chalets. At our peak, it was 123. We employed around 460 overseas staff. Now, as we all know, Brexit means we're a third country, so we have a very different process to go through.
Evidently, there are fewer chalets, but I think demand is still pretty good. I just wanted to get a sense for, how you're seeing bookings running for this winter, for example, how they're looking just now.
Being really honest for a moment, chalet and all ski holidays have gone up in price substantially. We talk about inflation in the economy going down. We are seeing signs of that in the ski market, but we've had another pressure that has pushed prices up. So there's fuel, which has come through on every type of accommodation. So whether you're staying in an apartment, a chalet or a hotel, fuel is an underlying cost, which we're not seeing much relief from those now. Of course, that filters through onto things like food and everything that you supply in your accommodation. But the other thing that happened is post-COVID, there was definitely a kind of revenge holiday phenomena. People hadn't skied. There was pent-up demand. Pent-up demand pushed prices up. Along with that, most travel companies reduced the size of their programs, which means your economies of scale are not as efficient as they used to be. But the other thing is that in negotiating, we used to negotiate contracts of 3, 5, 7, and 10 years. Well, when you go to an accommodation provider and say, give me your apartment for the season, they'll give you a price. You then say, give me your apartment for the next 3 seasons. It's quite understandable. You've got a stronger negotiating position. But post-COVID, all of us have been reluctant to engage in contracts that long. So our negotiating position has also been slightly weakened. France has been amazing in helping us navigate the visa and work permit system. And so a little more certainty has fed back into those tour operators who use that, and we can negotiate slightly longer contracts. So I think prices will start to come down over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, you referred to the employment process, and in fact, on episode 180, we had one of your colleagues, Jenny Greenwood. She was explaining to us the process for British staff, and actually, it has been more positive. Since the initial Brexit regulations came in, actually, it is possible for British staff to go out there, and there is a process that you can go through to get visas. But something that you referred to earlier, some lobbying that you've been doing with SBiT, sounds very interesting. Recently, European countries have floated the idea of a youth mobility scheme, something similar to what we have with Australia, where young people 18 to 25 can go to Australia and work there for a couple of years. Well, Charlie was explaining it to me in a bit of detail. Maybe you could tell us about it, Diane.
Yeah, we went to Paris to meet the number 2 in the Ministry of the Interior. We were asking, amongst other things, about the prospects for a youth mobility visa. Now, what was really fascinating, bear in mind, this is not a politician we were speaking to. This is a very high up civil servant. His view was the French economy cannot thrive without some degree of a migrant workforce. They like it, they want it, they've been moving forward in talks about it. The EU put a proposal to the British government and Rishi Sunak dismissed it out of hand. Now, it was a negotiating position. the EU's proposal for a youth mobility scheme included students. And so the British government didn't want its net migration figures to be affected by students, and so turned down that proposal. But all we need to do is adjust those measurements of the figures to something that's a bit more real. And I think we might have a more positive approach from a British government, especially if there's a change of government today.
Well, I think there probably is going to be a change of government today. That would be very surprising if that didn't happen. But a youth mobility scheme would be fantastic. And that would, mean that young people who currently the legal situation is you can only go to the EU for 90 and 180 days, or if you get a visa through a tour operator, then you can go for a season. But I was actually chatting to Jimmy from European Pubs, who was explaining to me that a number of their staff, they offer year-round contracts because it's just better for them, for the individuals in the long term. They don't have to go away, come back again, go through all these processes. A youth mobility scheme would obviously be a fantastic way of doing it. So I very much hope that something like that can come about. But I think the key point to underline is that, young British people can still get jobs in ski resorts. It's just more onerous than it used to be. You help them through that process, right?
Yeah, and anybody listening, I would encourage you to do it. And the reason I would encourage you to do it is at the event last night, full of tour operators, full of people associated with the ski industry. Iain, what percentage of those people do you think were ex-seasonaires?
At least 80, if not higher.
Yeah. And so, not only if you get onto the political platform, do you say the more exchanges you can have between people, cultural as well as trade exchanges, the better it is just for life and culture and avoidance of wars. But also as businesses, we pull on those resources actually for our sales teams, for our operations teams, for the logistics, because they've worked those resorts, not least of which they speak to customers about resorts that they've worked in. They know the runs, they know where the accommodation is, and they are the managers and directors of the future. So please, if you're even thinking of doing a ski season, don't be put off. Just make sure you go with a reputable tour operator who gets the right paperwork.
I can tell you there's certainly a lot of people out there who want to do a season anecdotally based on the teenagers and the A-level leavers that I know. Lots of people are wanting to do them. So all of these things are very encouraging, and we'll definitely be asking you or Charlie or other SBiT members back on to check on that progress. That's really interesting, Diane. Thank you very much for that. If it's okay, I'm going to move on to Rachael now. Great to have you back on the show. It was also around 2 years ago that you were last on the show, episode 97.
I was going to say it was 97.
There you go. Just as a bit of background, you are known as Miss Know-It-All, and with good reason, because you're probably the best connected person in the Australian ski industry. Would you say that's correct?
It's very kind of you, potentially. I mean, I've been doing it a long time, really. I mean, I've been doing it for 2 decades, and Australia is the number one international inbound market into British Columbia, Utah, Colorado, etc., and Japan, obviously. We're a highly coveted market for North America and Asia. But what I have noticed, Diane, is in recent times, particularly the last season, is a lot more of Australians have started leaning over towards Europe, which I'll be interested to track this coming winter as well, just because they've actually put a fair bit of money into the Australian, not a lot, a few francs here and there, but, into the Australian market. We're not, huge for them. I have noticed a lot more people from Australia heading that way.
We'll probably touch on that. I mean, partly it might be to do with what Diane mentioned before about that kind of revenge post-COVID holiday. I have friends from Perth in Australia who you've been thinking, oh, maybe we'll ski in Europe one time, and just thought, right, now we're going to do it and we're going to make it happen.
I feel Australians tend to ski overseas every year anyway. It's an annual tradition. It's what we do. The post-COVID rush was to actually get to the Australians and New Zealand ski fields as fast as they could, because most of them were shut down during COVID. And I feel the Europe last year was mainly, that US dollar exchange rate for Australia is really harsh. And the US didn't have as great a season as, well, Japan did. And also Japan has just, in the past 15 years and in the past 5 years in particular, it's just massive, and it's only a 10-hour flight. There's no jet lag. There's no altitude sickness. It's dollar for dollar, with the Japan yen being so weak against the Australian dollar. So I think they're the main reasons we haven't been doing North America as much as we normally would. As for Europe, you've got to be pretty rich in Australia to get to Europe. So I guess all the people I'm seeing over there, they're loaded.
And maybe some of the people would say that about skiers in general. But let's come back to Australia. Let's start with an important question. We are, currently in early July. I think typically, the resorts open up in mid-June. I think it's been a relatively slow start to the season, but the snow is looking a bit better just now.
Well, yes and no. So it's very hard in June. Everybody every year in June goes, oh my God, we've got no snow, we've got no snow, we've got no snow. And every year we don't have snow in June. And every few years we do have snow in June. We have incredible snowmaking, which has allowed all of the resorts in Australia to open up many, many ski lifts. The whole of Perisher now has all 4 areas open. We haven't had a lot of snow, to be honest. We really haven't. We've had, I don't know, maybe 30 centimetres all up in the season so far. New Zealand was as bad as we were, and they just got 30 to 50 centimetres, but very wet, dense snow. So I think everyone's just a little on edge because last year a lot of the resorts closed early, like very early. And one of our resorts that actually burnt down during the bushfires, Selwyn, was unable, obviously, that year in 2020 to open due to COVID. And the following year, they were still closed to COVID. And then when they were going to open, all of a sudden in May, we had this incredible snowstorm and they were unable to finish their rebuild. So they actually had to not open for 2022. And then last year they finally opened and they had to close early because we just didn't have enough snow. So this year we're all, rooting for Selwyn.
When you say they closed early, when would the season typically run to in Australia and New Zealand?
Well, end of September, sometimes middle of October. And, a lot of them were closing end of August last year or early September. It was pretty devastating. Actually, to be honest, Selwyn closed in August, which was, mid-season. That's peak season for us, August. July and August is when we traditionally get the most snow across both New Zealand and Australia, though New Zealand does tend to be a little later. I mean, I've gone skiing in New Zealand on September 8 in a 2-metre snowstorm that came out of nowhere. So, mind you, that was 10 years ago, so things have changed.
Yeah, the regular listeners will know that I went out to Australia this time last year. I went to visit my mum who lives in Newcastle, and while I was there, it was about a 5-6 hour drive to get to Perisher and Thredbo. And it's really interesting meeting the guys from the resorts there and actually, skiing the areas and getting a sense for them. But one of the things that they were getting very excited about, well, in both resorts, was there's a lot of new investment going on. Let's start with Thredbo. They have a new luge there now. That's quite a big feature, right?
Well, we don't call it a luge. We call it an alpine coaster, a roller coaster. It's not dissimilar to what's in Park City and Steamboat. And you sit on top of the rails.
There's a lot of these around in the Alps. I mean, Lehman Weir, I've done it. There's one in Chamonix. It's one of those, let's say roller coaster in which you can't come off. It's attached to the wheels, but you can go quite fast and it's brilliant fun.
I think the highest speed is 40k. You can't go past 40k. But the way they've built it is they've actually built it around the ski runs, which is pretty cool. And it's just another investment from Thredbo to make a commitment to year-round tourism. Because obviously with climate change, the ski industry is highly challenged down here, as it is globally. They're now doing mountain biking in summer, doing massive mountain bike competitions, and they've put in this alpine coaster.
Thredbo itself, they've also upgraded their freestyle options.
Okay, so Scotty James has invested some money into Thredbo with Charles Beckinsale, who you guys would know from Susfay, etc., and the stomping grounds in Europe, probably the best park builder in the world. I may be a little biased, but he certainly is. And 22-foot Winter Olympic-sized half pipe. First time Australia's actually had one, provided we get enough snow at the top. That will be built this year. And then, of course, Cardrona in New Zealand will have one, and we'll have one. So with Shaun White's new Snow World League and X Games League, there is a possibility that could actually hold a competition down in Thredbo. If you're Valentino Caselli or Scotty James or Shaun White or Chloe Kim, this is what you want to train on and this is what you compete on. And that's what we're getting.
Listeners may have heard of Scotty James, who just, he's obviously one of the most famous Australian snow sports stars, but do you want to just give us a bit of background on him?
Well, I think he's probably one of the most famous worldwide snowboarders. God, what hasn't he won? He's got silver and bronze in the Olympics. He's won X Games gold, I think, God knows how many times. He's just tied with Shaun White's X Games gold, and he's had World Championships 4 times.
Is there any kind of support from, I don't know what it's called, but like Snow Sports Australia for this? Because evidently, if you've got that type of facility, your ability to kind of have that input for new athletes, getting to train there, getting up to higher levels, that's got to improve, isn't it?
Well, we've been very, very fortunate. I mean, let's be honest, we're not going to win medals in Alpine, really. And we are definitely, if it's hard packed and it's made of ice, we'll probably be able to ski it. So we have a couple of things that have been built in recent years. There is a water ramp that was built up in Brisbane for the aerial skiers and the mogul skiers. And you potentially would have heard of Jakara Anthony, who just broke every record known to man in the FIS World Cup moguls and won all 3 Crystal Globes. She trains up there. Prior to this, they used to train in a yabby-filled creek in Victoria, filled with mud. And the Snow Australia have recently built the National Snow Sports Training Centre, which has a huge airbag and big air. And yeah, they've got all the guys training, all the guys and girls obviously training on that.
Let's move over to Perisher then, also in New South Wales. Now, listeners kind of might be aware that the kind of vertical drop in Australia isn't so high. So you don't really get gondolas as such over there, or there are not many of them. Mainly they're chairlifts, and they've one of their big investment is upgrading the chairlift over there, right?
Well, it's being upgraded at the moment. So it was dismantled during summer, and then, what do you call it? The foundations were put in, and you can't ski on the Mount P chair anymore. And the new one will be open in time for next season, which will be a high speed. But Perisher has 51 lifts and T-bars. It's 1,245 hectares. It's a big resort, but it is a Vail-owned resort alongside with Falls Creek and Hotham. But yeah, the vertical in Australia, you're not coming to Australia to ski vertical. You're going to Australia to ski amongst the snow gums.
Well, exactly. That was like what it was like when I was there. It's actually a decent ski area in Perisher across the board, but every run down didn't take particularly long. But okay, you've mentioned the Epic Pass, so that's really interesting, and I wanted to segue to that. Perisher and Hotham and Falls Creek are all owned by Vail Resorts, is that right?
All owned by Vail Resorts. Vail bought Perisher first, and then they bought Falls and Hotham.
We've had so much discussion on the podcast, and I was having these chats last night with several people at the Three Valleys event about the impact of the Epic and the Icon passes.
Yep.
We're really seeing it making a difference. Certainly in the States, we know that 50% of all skiing was done on those passes. Are you seeing any impact of that in Australia, people choosing to go to certain resorts, or is it more the outbound market? People from Australia choosing to go to Epic resorts when they travel?
I think that the reason that Vail Resorts purchased Perisher to start off with was to buy an Australian database, a mega Australian database, because obviously the business model is get everybody over to America, North America, get them to Vail Resort-owned resorts in the Northern Hemisphere, sell them lodging, sell them food on the mountain, etc. What people forget, there's a lot of talk here, as I'm sure there is with you, Diane and Iain, about the cost of living and the cost of skiing. But we did a story recently about the season passes in Australia. And while people might complain about the Epic Australia Pass and the Icon Pass, even though the Icon Pass only has a 7-day in Thredbo and 7-day in Mount Buller, our season passes before the Epic Australia Pass came in were $2,000. And now they're not for one resort, $2,000 for one resort. Now they're $900 if you get them early for 3 resorts plus 50-odd resorts overseas, or 2 resorts if you're on the Icon and however many overseas. That's pretty great value. But obviously, that being sold all around the world, you do have an issue with lift line numbers and crowding. Just look at Whistler.
Every now and then you get these memes about Perisher and some of the queues that you can kind of get at the bottom there. One of the reasons maybe why they're updating their chairlifts, etc. I know there's lots of factors that come into play there, but sometimes that can look pretty bad.
It does look bad, but really, to be honest, and it does make me laugh, because there was a hilarious photo last year. It probably was in August. It was one patch of snow caught on a snow cam, and there were like 10 Australian skiers on it. I think they were kids. And it was like, this is skiing in Australia. But it kind of was skiing in Australia last year to a certain degree. But those big long lift lines, we have massive winds and gale force winds here that stop the chairs, and then you end up with only Front Valley open. And then Front Valley is as you would have skated it, is what, like not very long, wide and short. And of course, you're going to end up with massive queues. But no one's going to talk about that. They just love to hate on Vail Resorts. They love to hate on Alterra. People just love to hate on the internet.
Certainly, from the different interviews I've done and the discussion we had about Vail Resorts, I've never had so much feedback about a single episode. Episode 204, when I interviewed Mike Goar, Vail Resorts representative in Europe. Never had so much feedback, and I think there's a genuine debate. But let's move on slightly. You mentioned about the cost of living and how that's affecting the domestic market.
Yeah.
I think a story I saw on your website, Snow's Best, is the slow Aldi sale this year an indicator of a slowing market across the board? Because it's what we think of as like the middle of Lidl, where they sell all their ski gear early on, and apparently it just hasn't really moved this year.
Well, we talk about the Snow Travel Expo being the pre-season starter, like the Bode Miller film. The Aldi sale traditionally in Australia has had queues out the door, around the side and round the back to get the snow gear when it launches on that Saturday morning. I live in an area that has access to 3 Aldis. Every single one of them, it's July 4, every single one of them still has snow gear. They have not sold out. So we did this story about, okay, is this the barometer of how the ski season is going to be? There's a lot of talk about cost of living in Australia. We're not in a recession yet, but we've had, I think, 13 rate rises in 2 weeks or something like that. So people are really feeling the crunch. Skiing is not cheap. Now, the issue, as we talked about before, is not necessarily the season passes. The day passes are expensive. You pay over $200 for a day pass in Australia to ski like you're not skiing North America. But that's cost prohibitive to beginners. It's not cost prohibitive to those that ski every year, because they're going to buy an Epic Pass or an Icon Pass or a Season Pass. It just makes it hard to grow a sport when a day pass is that expensive. What makes it harder to grow a sport is the fact that accommodation in Jindabyne, accommodation in Thredbo, accommodation in Bright, in Hotham, in Falls, in Mount Buller, it is outrageous how much money they cost, like thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. Some places are charging $1,000 a night for a 3x3 room. I might be exaggerating a little bit there, but I don't think I am. Most of them haven't been upgraded, and people are just jack of it. They're just jack of the gouging. And it's not necessarily the resorts that are doing the gouging, but they're the ones that are getting the hate.
That is very interesting. And I guess, you've also got the secondary issue of climate change, which you mentioned. People are maybe less likely to book in advance. Although my impression from Australia, I basically spoke to every single person I shared a chairlift with while I was over there, because I wanted to get a sense of, what was going on. And it seemed like, if you live in Sydney or Melbourne, the bigger urban areas, you can just like drive up to a resort so much more accessible than in the UK, and just go for a couple of days skiing if the conditions are good. Not so many people go for the week-long trips, weekend skiing there, and then they're going to Japan or the States or Canada, etc. But it's important that people ski domestically, and if the snow's not reliable, then is that affecting demand as well?
Well, we've had a bad season last year, and this season is long-term forecast is not looking fabulous. It's looking better than last year, but it's not looking fabulous. But this is what happens. We have a couple of really crappy years, and then we have a really good year. But climate change is a very difficult discussion in Australia. It's not as openly discussed and as openly accepted as science as it is in Europe. So if we put anything about climate change up, again, people just love to hate on the internet, don't they? And they absolutely go each other. And as soon as we get a big snowstorm, they'll go, oh yeah, what were you talking about? Climate change. Well, that's the whole point. They're extreme storms. This is the whole point. Do you not get this? So there's a very long education program in Australia around skiers and snowboarders for that. There was a report that came out recently. It was commissioned by Protect Our Winters, and it was with the Australian National University. And that was saying that I think we would have a 2-week ski season left if we kept going the way we're going. But there was hope if we dropped them down to low.
There is definitely hope. And, I certainly still believe that it's achievable to turn things around. And some of the lobbying that Diane and SBiT are doing, and the other initiatives that are in place, can certainly help with that. So, Rachael, that's brilliant. Thank you so much for that insight into what's going on in Australia. We're going to move towards the close now. I enjoy all feedback about the show. I'd like to know what you think, especially about our features. So please contact me on social at Ski Podcast or email the skipodcast@gmail.com. Few bits of feedback since the last episode. Lozza gave us an Apple Podcast review. Thank you. She said every episode is a little ski holiday, which I liked. And she also asked for more Southern Hemisphere coverage. Lozza, hopefully this episode has ticked that box for you. Richard Sideways on Forum Snowhead said, good interview with Stu Brass. That was number 213. I remember some of that stuff from back in the day with Snowball Club UK. And Alex Heyman said, really enjoyed the chat with Paddy Graham last month. That was number 211. So, listener, if you like the podcast, there are 3 things you can do to help. You can review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can subscribe so you never miss an episode. Or if you wish, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/the Ski Podcast. You can follow me at Skipedia and the podcast at the Ski Podcast. There are now 220 episodes of the Ski Podcast to catch up with. 99 of those were listened to in the last week. So if you're missing the snow throughout summer, there is so much to listen to in our back catalogue. Just go to theskipodcast.com, search around the tags and categories, and you're bound to find something of interest to you. I also noticed in the stats, 58% of our listeners in the last week were in the UK, 16% in the States, and everyone else listening in from all corners of the world, including Argentina, Kenya, Thailand, and Latvia. So I'd like to thank my guest today, Diane. Thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure. Always a pleasure, Ian. I look forward to episode 200 and whatever I'm on next. No, I've flattered myself saying 200 and something. It might not be till 300 and something.
Excellent. And Rachael, thank you very much.
Oh, you're so welcome. Always a pleasure to chat with you.
Excellent. And finally, listener, thank you for joining us wherever in the world you're listening right now. And until next time, goodbye.